In this video, I am going to discuss Ludwig Wittgenstein's philosophical insight of his later phase of life. In our previous video, we have touched upon Wittgenstein's earlier work known as Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, and there we tried to elaborate his picture theory of meaning. Later Wittgenstein, that means Wittgenstein in his later phase of life, he criticized his earlier work, Tractatus, considered it dogmatic, and he refuted complete dogmatism. That is why a transition is found towards anti-dogmatism in his later philosophical thinking. So a transition towards anti-dogmatism culminated in his later philosophical work entitled Philosophical Investigations. So we have seen that earlier work Tractatus was built on the structure with the objective to reveal the structure of elementary propositions in order to reveal the logical structure that is common to language, thought and world. This was the objective of Ludwig Wittgenstein. In fact, the whole superstructure of his philosophical system was constructed upon logic. So he used logic as the basis of his philosophical system. I'm talking about early phase of Wittgenstein's philosophical thought. As we mentioned that a transition took place towards anti-dogmatism, and the culmination is found in his later philosophical work, Philosophical Investigations. This book has been posthumously published, and it has been translated by Ainscombe and edited by Ainscombe and Rashris. It essentially constitutes questioning, and philosophical investigation exposed the fallacies of a traditional way of looking at language, thought, world and philosophy. Wittgenstein criticized the traditional style of philosophizing as dogmatic, and he offered a more diversified, fluid theories, way of looking at language. So now we shall look in this video at the concepts he offered in his later phase of life. As we mentioned that a transition took place from the realm of logic to the grammar of ordinary language philosophy. A transition from representation theory of meaning to meaning as use. Also a transition from an emphasis on analysis and definition to language game and family resemblance took place. So Wittgenstein began his philosophical investigations with the quotation of Saint Augustine. So in order to express the traditional picture of the essence of language, that was based on the idea that word refers to an object. It was an Augustinian picture of essence of language. Word refers to language. Word refers to object. This might be correct to some extent, but this is very limited because it completely ignores the role of activity in establishing meaning in language. It is only capturing the representational character of language. So picture of language as only representation or picturing is utterly limited. In order to account for the countless multiple uses of a word, Wittgenstein introduced the notion called language game in his later phase of philosophical thought. The juxtaposition of the two words, language and game, the phraseology has very important rationale. As we know, just like game doesn't, we in game we do not find any we do not find any common and final definition or essential characteristic. Like that, in language we do not find out what is common in varieties of uses of a word and what constitute those linguistic terms as a part of language or language. So varieties of uses in language we can see, but we do not know what is common among them and what makes them part of language. That is why, in order to account for, in order to address these varieties and multiple uses of language and their unfixedness and lack of boundaries, Wittgenstein conceptualized the language game, the notion of language game. Language game was more fluid, more diversified, and activity-oriented perspective on language. It was basically trying to capture the varieties of uses of the same word. As opposed to his earlier work, like picturing as the essence of language, he didn't define language game, because definition harkens back to the old dogmatic style. So in order to capture the playful and activity oriented character, he introduced the notion language game. And language game is a part of broader context, which Wittgenstein called form of life. Form of life is basically what type of creature we are, what kind of activities we do, what sort of activity we do, what kind of creature we are. That actually conveys the rule of grammar. Form of life, that constitute the form of life. What form of life we lead as a creature, what kind of activity we do, that constitute our form of life and also conveys the rule of grammar. So language game is essentially rule governed. But here one thing is to be very importantly noted, that rule here does not entail any strict and definite systems of rules. This rule is not suggested by any constructive theory, because again this will lead to dogmatism. The rule here refers to the conventional attitude of human being, conventional nature of human activity. So language game, that's why very fluid, very flexible. Family resemblance, his notion of family resemblance, a complete rejection of the definition of the requirement of defining or find out the essence of language. So he mentioned that there is no reason to look for a core in which the meaning of a word is located. We need to just look, we need not to think, we just see, don't think. He is again and again emphasizing on seeing directly. Do not think but look. This is his phrase. Because we fail to see the varieties of uses of the same word. He used an analogy, tools in a toolbox. Tools in a toolbox is an analogy to make us convinced about his notion, language game. We can see the varieties of uses of a tool in the toolbox. We don't fail to see it, but on account of the uniform appearance of words, we fail to see that a word has numerous uses, countless uses. Okay. So because the word by appearance are very uniform, and that mislead us to think that word has essential core in which its meaning lies. So another suitable analogy um, he used to figure out the different uses of language, the connection among the different uses of language. So we understood that there are varieties of uses of the same word. Now, what is the connection among the varieties of uses? So in order to account for the connection among the varieties of uses of the same word, he used the most suitable analogy known as family resemblance. So he emphasized that there is no reason to look for an essential core in which the meaning of a word is located. Rather, we need to travel with the varieties of uses, their similarities and dissimilarities, overlapping and crisscrossing. So we need to capture the network of varieties of uses that are similar and dissimilar both, an overlapping and crisscrossing relationship. That analogy, family resemblance, also exhibits the lack of boundary and exactness, distance from the exactness of the meaning of a word. Lack of boundaries among the varieties of uses of a word, and the distance from the exactness. But at the same time, he asserted that language game must be rule following, but here he clarified that this rule does not imply any strict and definite systems of rules. It is something has to do with the conventional nature of human activity. So the rule is determined by, the rule of grammar is constituted by the form of life we live, the form of life in which the language game is part of. The form of life the language game belongs to. So these constitute the rule of grammar. Rule of grammar basically conveys what type of it conveys what type of creature we are, what kind of activity we do, what sort of form we live. This actually conveys the rule of grammar. So the basic salient tenets of Wittgenstein's latter phase of work is language game, family resemblance, use, meaning of a word is its use, and the language as rule following character of ordinary language, the language game, and language game as part of form of life. And in the next video we shall touch upon the private language argument. So see you in the next video.